It started out like any other afternoon. I was at home, just finishing up some yard work, when I got a call from my wife, Colonel Eve Reed. She'd just landed and was on her way home after an extended deployment aboard the USS Truman. Months. At sea, months without seeing each other. I was excited. She was excited. What I didn't know was that our HOA's self-proclaimed queen, Karen, had plans to turn her homecoming into chaos. Colonel Eve Reed isn't just my wife. She's a decorated officer in the United States Navy with more discipline in her pinky than most people have in their entire lives. But to Karen, she was just another rule breaker who dared to park her military vehicle with all her gear on the neighborhood street. For Karen, the uniform didn't matter. The medals didn't matter. The fact that Eve was returning from active duty didn't matter. Karen saw the government-issued duffel bags. She saw the temporary parking permit hanging on the mirror. She saw Eve stepping out in uniform. And instead of showing gratitude or even basic respect, she saw a threat to her precious neighborhood aesthetic. I was still inside when I heard the sirens. I ran outside thinking something terrible had happened. That's when I saw the police cruisers lining up, and Karen standing next to them like she was the one giving orders. She had actually called the cops on Eve, accusing her of suspicious activity and unauthorized parking. Eve was calm, composed exactly how she always is. She stood in full uniform, hands visible, surrounded by her gear. One of the officers started to approach, hand near his belt, asking her to step away from the vehicle. That's when it happened. Eve looked him straight in the eye and said, "Lieutenant Colonel Eve Reed, Naval Command, USS Truman. I just returned from a 6-month classified mission. You will show me identification and state your purpose for this stop." You could feel the shift in the air. The police officers went from tense to uncertain in seconds. One of them, clearly realizing who he was dealing with, stepped back and nodded to his partner. Karen was still yelling something about HOA bylaws, unauthorized vehicles, code violations, and keeping the neighborhood clean. Eve calmly pulled out her identification, military orders, and proof of residency. She handed them over like a professional, then crossed her arms and waited. The senior officer, looked everything over. Then looked at Karen. He said, "Ma'am, this woman outranks all of us. There's no crime here. Frankly, I'd advise you to show a little more respect next time." Karen's face went red. She tried to argue, of course she did. Claimed she didn't know and was just trying to protect the neighborhood. But no one was listening anymore. Eve simply walked past her, picked up her gear, and headed toward the house like the absolute boss she is. The officers apologized to Eve, not to Karen, and left. Karen was left standing there, humiliated, grocery cart still half full, stunned into silence. Later that evening, Eve and I sat on the porch. She didn't say much about it. She never brags. That's just who she is. But I could tell she was a little disappointed. Not in the officers, not even in Karen really, but in the fact that after serving her country, after risking her life, she came home to a place where someone judged her before they even knew her name. But here's the best part. A few days later, the HOA board held an emergency meeting not about Eve, but about Karen. Turns out, this wasn't the first time she'd called the cops over petty things. She'd reported kids for playing basketball, cited veterans for flags that weren't the approved size, even complained about flower beds that didn't match her color scheme. The neighborhood had had enough. That night, a vote was passed to remove Karen from her self-appointed compliance watch duties. She wasn't happy, threatened legal action, of course, but no one backed her up this time. Eve? She's now the most respected person on our street. The neighbors came out the next morning to thank her. Some brought cookies, others brought coffee. One kid even handed her a crayon drawing of a Navy ship with a giant American flag. She hung it on the fridge, and Karen. Well, she still lives here. But she keeps a low profile now. Especially when Eve's home. The days that followed were quieter. Karen, Once the loudest voice on the block became a shadow of her former self. No more clipboard patrols. No more unsolicited citations in mailboxes. For the first time in years, the neighborhood could breathe, but Eve, she didn't let any of it get to her. She got back into the rhythm of civilian life quickly. Early morning runs, reorganizing her gear, and spending time with the neighbors who were more than happy to welcome her back properly this time. You'd never hear her talk about what she did on deployment. That's just who she is. Humble, private, focused. But people could see the weight she carried, and they respected her for it. One evening, while we were walking our dog around, the block Karen was out trimming her hedges. She avoided eye contact, which was odd considering how much she used to love confrontation. As we passed, she muttered something not quite loud enough to make out, but it sounded like wasn't personal. Eve stopped, turned, and with the same calm, unshakable tone she used with the police, said, "Karen, I don't take it personally. I take it as a reminder." Karen looked up confused. Reminder of what? Eve nodded. That sometimes even in the safest neighborhoods, you can be made to feel like a stranger in your own home. It shut Karen down completely. But Eve wasn't trying to be cruel. She just tells the truth. She's a leader, on and off duty. A week later, we received an envelope in our mailbox. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. Inside was a typed letter, an apology. From Karen, she said she'd made assumptions, let her position get to her head, and that she never meant to disrespect someone who had given so much for this country. It was a start. Eve read the letter, folded it carefully, and tucked it into a box with her deployment photos and commendations. She didn't gloat, didn't even mention it to anyone. That's not her style. The real change wasn't in Karen, though. It was in the neighborhood. People started talking more. The kids played outside without worry. Veterans began to proudly display their flags and decals again. The silence that Karen used to rule over was replaced with laughter, barbecues, and small acts of kindness. Eve unintentionally became a pillar in our little community. It's not because she demanded it, but because people saw who she was. A protector. A professional. A person who leads by example. Some of the newer neighbors didn't even know the full story. Just that the woman who jogs every morning with perfect posture and a navy cap was someone to admire. And slowly, the narrative around here changed. HOA no longer stood for harassment of all now. It started to feel like home of accountability, and Karen, well, she still waves when she sees us. Polite, quiet, and dare I say, respectful. She hasn't called the cops since that day. No more code violation notices. No more gossip-filled group emails. Just silence. Which in this case says everything. As for Eve, she's back in uniform next month, preparing to ship out again. Different mission, different coast. But before she leaves, the neighborhood is throwing a send-off. Even Karen, RSVPD, volunteered to bring potato salad. That's the power of real leadership. Not loud, not forceful, just undeniable. And when my wife walks into that farewell party in her dress blues, standing tall with her nameplate shining in the sun, everyone, including Karen, will remember exactly who she asterisk a few days before Eve's deployment. The neighborhood was buzzing. Flyers had gone up on mailboxes, group chats were alive, and even the grumpy old guy on the corner, who never spoke more than 3 words to anyone, was seen putting up string lights in his yard. The farewell party was no small affair. Tables were lined up with homemade dishes. Red, white, and blue bunting decorated the cul-de-sac. And kids ran around with little toy jets and sailor hats. It wasn't just a celebration. It was a message. One that said, "We see you. We appreciate you. You belong here." She helped set up, made sure the trash bags were tied properly, and spent more time thanking others than accepting thanks herself. That's who she is. Never makes anything about her, even when it clearly is. Then came the part no one expected. Karen stood up. She was holding a small envelope, hands slightly shaking. Most of the crowd fell silent, not out of fear, but sheer curiosity. No one knew what she'd say. Not after everything. She cleared her throat and said, I owe this neighborhood an apology. And more importantly, I owe Colonel Reed one. People looked around, unsure if they were dreaming. Karen continued. When Eve came home, I judged her before I understood her. I saw rules, not people. And I forgot what it means to serve. Not just your country, but your community. Then she walked over and handed Eve the envelope. Eve didn't open it right away. She looked Karen in the eyes and nodded once. Small, respectful nod. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something real. Later, when we got home, Eve opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note, this time not typed. Simply read, "Thank you for protecting freedoms I took for granted. I'm learning. Karen." And beneath. The note was something surprising, a donation receipt. Karen had made a contribution in Eve's name to a military family support organization. Not a grand gesture, but a sincere one. That night, Eve said something I'll never forget. She looked out the window at the quiet street and said, "Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones you don't expect."